On June 15, 2024, in La Crosse, Wisconsin, Marcy, a 30-year-old woman full of excitement, decided to celebrate her birthday with an extravagant weekend-long party. Eager to mark this milestone in her life, she planned to indulge in everything: delicious cocktails, lively music, and moments of shining in the spotlight. However, instead of ending with candles and cake, Marcy's celebration turned into a chaotic series of events at a local VFW bar, making her birthday an unforgettable story in a way no one had hoped for. Marcy's grand party, full of high hopes and questionable decisions, eventually made its way to the local VFW post, a modest establishment known for its cheap drinks, dim lighting, and a clientele that had come to expect quiet nights of beer and cards, not impromptu performances. To VFW, with its slightly sagging neon sign and worn wooden floors, was the kind of place where peace-seeking patrons went to escape the nose of the world, not to have their Wednesday night turned into a spectacle. But, of course, Marcy was not about to let any of that stop her from making an entrance worthy of her self-proclaimed royalty. As she stepped through the door, a hush fell over the room, followed by a buzz of mild amusement. She wasn't about to just walk in, no. Marcy made sure to announce her presence. The sound of her high heels, audibly clicking on the wooden floor, echoed through the room like the arrival of some sort of diva messiah. With arms outstretched like she was about to take flight, Marcy made her dramatic proclamation: "The Queen has arrived." Her voice rang out, bouncing off the walls and causing several patrons to drop their glasses in surprise. One older man in the corner, mid-sip, nearly choked on his beer as he looked over the top of his glasses. Marcy was oblivious to the wide-eyed stares and raised eyebrows of the crowd. She strutted further into the bar, each step more exaggerated than the last, like a runway model on an off-Broadway stage. She twirled once for effect, her faux fur stole swaying dramatically behind her, and winked at the bartender, who was visibly questioning whether he had just entered the Twilight Zone. As she took a seat at the bar, she leaned forward and addressed the bartender in a voice that could only be described as theatrically regal. "What's the special tonight, darling?" she asked, as if she were royalty choosing between kingdoms. The bartender, still recovering from the shock of her arrival, managed to mumble, "We've got margaritas, pretty much just margaritas." "Perfect," Marcy declared with an air of finality, as if the margarita was her birthright. As she waited for her drink, she scanned the room, taking in the confused faces of the patrons who had now fully turned their attention to her, many with mouths agape, others whispering behind their hands. She noticed the group of older gentlemen at the back booth who had been quietly discussing the game, now quietly trying to avoid eye contact. With a dramatic flip of her hair, Marcy smirked. "Don't worry, gentlemen," she said, giving a mock salute. "I'm not here to ruin your night, just here to reign over it." The room, once filled with the low hum of casual conversation and the clink of glasses, had now become a stage for Marcy's impromptu performance. Each passing moment was an opportunity for her to add more flair, more drama, and more absurdity to her already over-the-top arrival. Little did anyone know, this grand entrance would be just the beginning of a night that would soon spiral into a chaotic, unforgettable spectacle. As the bartender slid the margarita toward her, Marcy raised it high, calling out, "To my reign. May it be as strong as this margarita." She took a long sip, then immediately winced, clearly regretting the extra salt on the rim. "A queen must always watch her intake," she muttered under her breath, before turning her attention back to the room, where the patrons had begun to whisper in hushed tones. The chaos had only just begun. Initially, her energy seemed harmless enough, with Marcy holding court by the bar, ordering rounds of tequila for herself while announcing to anyone within earshot that she was 30, flirty, and thriving. But as the margaritas flowed, her enthusiasm quickly spiraled into chaotic exuberance. By her third drink, or perhaps her fifth, accounts vary, Marcy climbed onto an empty bar stool, waving her oversized purse like a medieval mace, and declared herself queen of the night. What began as light-hearted fun took a sharp turn into what witnesses later described as interpreted purse combat, her handbag bursting at the seams with mysterious heavy objects, possibly a mix of expired makeup, loose coins, emergency snacks, and, as one patron joked, the shattered dreams of her 20s, became an unlikely but formidable weapon. Marcy swung it with wild abandon, narrowly missing the bartender's head and scattering drink glasses like a game of drunken bowling. At one point, She locked eyes with a man enjoying his beer in quiet solitude and shouted, "Kneel before me, peasant." When he didn't comply, she launched a half-hearted swing in his direction, which only succeeded in spilling her own drink on her sequined dress. The other patrons, initially amused by her antics, soon realized they were witnessing a scene spiraling out of control. A man attempting to enjoy his fries found himself ducking under the table as Marcy's purse whizzed perilously close to his head. A group of women celebrating a bachelorette party began to slowly inch toward the exit, whispering nervously about avoiding the crazy birthday girl. Despite a chorus of pleas for her to calm down, Marcy remained defiant, her voice booming over the jukebox as she shouted, "It's my birthday, I'm the main character." When one brave soul attempted to reason with her, suggesting she take a little breather, she pointed dramatically at him and declared, "You're banished." As the scene escalated, the patrons' collective patience wore thin. Someone in the back muttered, "That's it, I'm calling the cops," which prompted murmurs of agreement from the rest of the room. But Marcy, unbothered and completely lost in her own fantasy, continued her drunken reign, swaying precariously as she prepared for another round of purse-swinging theatrics. It was only a matter of time before backup arrived. When officers arrived at the VFW post, they were greeted by an unusual sight. Marcy, perched on a bar stool like it was her royal throne, gesticulating wildly as she engaged the beleaguered bartender in a fiery, one-sided debate. "It's not about the drinks," she exclaimed, her voice rising above the chatter of the remaining patrons. "It's about my right to stay and slay. You wouldn't understand, you're part of the system." The bartender, arms crossed and visibly exhausted, glanced at the officers with a look that could only be described as desperate. "Please," he said in a tone that was equal parts plea and command, "just get her out of here before she grabs the mic for karaoke. I can't go through that again." The officers, attempting to de-escalate the situation, approached with calm professionalism. "Ma'am," one of them began, "we just need to talk to you for a moment." But Marcy, far from being intimidated, turned to face them with the exaggerated grace of a soap opera star. "Oh, so now the police are here to oppress me too," she declared, placing a hand dramatically on her chest. "You don't even know who I am, do you?" The officers exchanged quick, knowing glances. "Why don't you tell us, ma'am?" one suggested, trying to keep his tone neutral. Marcy seized the opportunity, launching into an impromptu monologue that would have made a Broadway director proud. "I am Marcy, the Beyoncé of Wisconsin," she announced, throwing her arms wide as if addressing a stadium. "I am a symbol of resilience, a beacon of light in this dreary world. And I will not be silenced." Her speech, though incoherent, was delivered with such conviction that a few patrons couldn't help but stifle laughs. But the officers remained composed, their patience starting to wear thin. "Ma'am, we just need to see some identification," one officer said, holding out his hand. Marcy gasped, clutching her sequined dress as if deeply insulted. "Identification? Are you joking? My presence is my ID," she declared. At that moment, the situation took a turn. She grabbed her infamous purse, now recognized by everyone in the room as a hazardous weapon, and swung it in the general direction of one officer. Fortunately, her aim was more impaired than her confidence, and the bag missed by a wide margin, colliding instead with a nearby bar stool. "Okay, that's enough," the officer said firmly, stepping forward. But Marcy wasn't finished. "You're just jealous," she shouted, her voice reaching a new pitch. "You can't handle my power. My aura is too strong." She attempted to twirl dramatically, but the motion threw her off balance, causing her to stumble into the bar. As the officers moved in to restrain her, Marcy doubled down on her theatrics, flailing her arms and shouting, "I'm being oppressed. The patriarchy strikes again." The bartender, now leaning wearily against the counter, muttered to no one in particular, "She's all yours, guys." As the chaos spiraled further, Marcy's declarations of grandeur reached absurd new heights. Standing unsteadily, with the fervor of a self-proclaimed revolutionary, she pointed an accusatory finger at the room. "You don't understand," she bellowed. "I'm not just anyone, I'm a legend. I'll shut down this whole country if I have to." The officers, maintaining their professionalism despite the growing spectacle, attempted to reason with her. "Ma'am, we need you to calm down," one of them said firmly. But Marcy was on a roll, gesturing wildly with her purse held aloft like a scepter. "Calm down, Calm down, she echoed incredulously. Do you calm down when greatness walks into the room? No, you bow. And I'm here to take over the world one VFW at a time. The patrons, watching from a cautious distance, exchanged amused yet wary glances. One muttered, "This is better than Netflix," while another quietly recorded the scene on their phone. In a climactic outburst, Marcy spun around dramatically, nearly tripping over her own heels, and shouted, "You're all just jealous because it's my day. This is my time to shine." Her voice cracked under the weight of her impassioned delivery, but her resolve remained unshaken. The officers, clearly unimpressed by her theatrical antics, moved in to detain her. "All right, that's enough," one said as he gently but firmly took hold of her arm. Marcy, however, was not one to go quietly. As the cuffs clicked into place, she erupted with indignation. "You can't arrest Beyoncé," she cried, twisting her wrists in an exaggerated display of protest. Then, as if the universe demanded one final act of absurdity, she launched into a passionate albeit highly incoherent rendition of Single Ladies. The performance included offbeat clapping and a half-hearted attempt at the iconic dance moves, all while she stumbled forward under the officer's guidance. "I'm doing this for the people," she shouted between verses. "The people deserve Beyoncé." The officers exchanged exasperated glances. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for disorderly conduct and obstruction," one said, his tone calm but firm. Marcy, undeterred, leaned into her defiance. "Fine," she shouted. "But when I take over, you'll regret this day. I'll write it in my memoir, how Beyoncé was betrayed by Wisconsin." The arresting officers carefully led her out, her voice still carrying through the night as she hummed a chorus of her makeshift anthem. Meanwhile, the bartender let out a long sigh of relief, muttering, "She didn't even make it to karaoke. Thank God." As the officers pieced together Marcy's chaotic trail through town, it became clear that her VFW escapade was merely the grand finale of a day filled with bizarre misadventures. Earlier that morning, witnesses reported seeing her at a nearby cafe, dressed in what she called her casual queen attire, a glittery jumpsuit paired with a tiara. She strolled in with the confidence of royalty visiting their subjects. Approaching the counter, she dramatically ordered a cappuccino, declaring, "Make sure the foam reflects my aura." Powerful yet enigmatic. When the barista, thoroughly confused but professional, handed her the drink, Marcy studied the foam intently. "Yes," she murmured, nodding approvingly, "this is exactly what I imagined. My aura is glowing today." She then reached into her sequin purse and pulled out a crisp $500 Monopoly bill, placing it on the counter with a flourish. "Keep the change," she said magnanimously, leaving the barista to stun to respond as she sashayed out the door. But her reign of eccentricity didn't end there. Marcy's next stop was a local bowling alley, where she claimed she had a calling to free the oppressed. Initially, she seemed like any other patron, renting shoes and selecting a bowling ball with what could almost pass for normalcy. However, once she reached the lane, things took a turn. Instead of bowling, Marcy marched down the slick wooden lane, dodging the automatic sweeper with surprising agility. "These pins have been imprisoned for too long," she shouted, addressing the scattered bowlers, most of whom froze mid-frame to watch the spectacle. She then attempted to gather the pins in her arms, yelling, "Be free, my comrades." The staff quickly intervened, but Marcy was not deterred. "You're part of the system," she accused, pointing an accusatory finger at the manager. "These pins have dreams, too." Despite her protest, she was escorted out, leaving behind a trail of glitter from her jumpsuit and the faint scent of margaritas. By the time she reached the VFW post that evening, Marcy had already left her unique mark on La Crosse, Wisconsin. Each stop had added another layer to the legend of her birthday celebration, setting the stage for the climactic showdown with law enforcement. Little did she know, her chaotic odyssey was about to reach its inevitable conclusion. Marcy's legendary birthday adventure ended not with a triumphant parade, but with a humbling journey through the legal system. After a night of drama that included interpretive purse combat, unsolicited Beyoncé renditions, and threats to overthrow the United States, Marcy faced the consequences of her actions. She was formally charged with disorderly conduct, obstruction, and making threats to law enforcement. As the charges were read, one officer couldn't help but quip, "Well, at least she didn't follow through on blowing up the United States like she promised." The comment drew chuckles in the precinct, but Marcy, sitting cuffed and scowling, remained unfazed. "They'll miss me, and I'm gone," she muttered under her breath. Her 3-day stint in custody was less glamorous than Marcy had anticipated. Stripped of her tiara and forced to swap her glittery jumpsuit for an orange jumpsuit, she quickly discovered that jail was not the ideal stage for her self-proclaimed celebrity status. Still, she tried to maintain her diva persona, insisting that her meals be served with a side of respect and attempting to lead her fellow inmates in an off-key rendition of "We Are the Champions." The other inmates, however, were less than receptive. "Lady, sit down," one grumbled after her third attempt at a motivational speech about rising from the ashes. Undeterred, Marcy proclaimed, "You're all just jealous of my glow-up." When her release finally came, secured by a $1,500 signature bond, Marcy strutted out of the facility with the bravado of someone who had survived a harrowing ordeal. Yet, the time in custody had given her some food for thought, if only a little. Reflecting on her actions, she solemnly declared to the press, who were actually just curious onlookers, "I've learned something important. Tequila and entitlement don't mix." As she walked away, Marcy's newfound wisdom seemed fleeting. Spotting a bird perched on a nearby fence, she dramatically raised her arms and shouted, "Fly free, little one. Take my story to the skies," before nearly tripping over her shoelaces. Witnesses later reported that Marcy left the area humming "Single Ladies" once again, possibly plotting her next big adventure. Whether she had truly learned her lesson or was simply regrouping for a sequel, one thing was certain: La Crosse, Wisconsin, would not soon forget the whirlwind that was Marcy's 30th birthday. As Marcy emerged from the aftermath of her 30th birthday, a mixture of exhaustion and misplaced pride settled over her. Sitting on her couch days later, wrapped in a leopard print blanket and nursing a slightly bruised ego and shoulder, thanks to her infamous purse-swinging incident, she sipped on a cup of coffee. Her best friend, Amanda, who had wisely bailed on the VFW outing early, asked cautiously, "So was it worth it?" Marcy leaned back, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Are you kidding me?" she exclaimed. "Of course. It was a success. Sure, I didn't get cake, but who needs cake when you've got an epic story?" She waved her hand dramatically, nearly spilling her coffee. "I mean, how many people can say they almost got banned from an entire bowling alley, philosophized foam art with a barista, and threatened to take over the United States all in one day?" Amanda raised an eyebrow. "Most people would prefer cake, Marcy." Undeterred, Marcy continued, "This was legendary. I'm basically a local icon now, and let's not forget my Beyoncé moment." She stood up, trying to imitate a Beyoncé pose, only to lose her balance and flop back onto the couch. "That officer was totally jealous of my vibe." Amanda sighed. "Marcy, the only thing those officers envied was a peaceful Friday night." Amanda sighed. "Marcy, the only thing those officers envied was a peaceful Friday night." As the conversation wound down, Marcy declared, "You know, I learned something important that night." Amanda perked up. "Oh, what's that?" Marcy held up a finger for emphasis. "Sometimes, the best gift is just staying home." Amanda nodded approvingly until Marcy added, "But if I'd stayed home, who would have made history at the VFW?" Before Amanda could respond, Marcy's phone buzzed with a notification. She grinned and turned the screen toward her friend. "Look, they're selling I Survived Marcy's Birthday Bash t-shirts. I'm basically a brand now." Amanda rolled her eyes, but Marcy was already envisioning her next big adventure. As she clicked add to cart, she whispered to herself, 31 is going to be even bigger. For the residents of La Crosse, Wisconsin, one thing was certain. This was a birthday they wouldn't forget no matter how much they tried. As the night slowly fell and Marcy walked out of the VFW post, she couldn't help but feel an odd sense of exhilaration. Despite her birthday party ending in chaos and a few bruised egos, Marcy firmly declared it to be an unforgettable night. In her mind, it was a grand victory, filled with memorable stories to share with friends and those around her. But from a different perspective, it was a deep reminder. Sometimes, the greatest gift you can give yourself is knowing when to hold back and when to walk away. Marcy's story is not just a lesson in overindulgence at parties, but also a cautionary tale about what happens when we let the desire for glory and intoxication push us to our limits. Life isn't always a big stage, and not every moment requires us to be the queen of the party. In reality, Sometimes the best gift is the peace found within yourself, without the need to impress or disrupt everything around you. This was the lesson Marcy ultimately learned. When things can go too far, sometimes the true joy is found in serenity.